I have learned that money does not hate the law. It only hates the moment the law finally says no. Tell me something, and be honest with me. Would you have leaned in and listened if you heard a rich young man tell a sitting judge that she worked for his father? I hope you would, because that sentence still rings in my ears. It was Friday, July 18th, 2025, and before that morning was over, a courtroom on Bell Street went so still I could hear my clerk turn a single page. I was on the bench at Bell Street Municipal Court in Norfield, Ohio, at 8:59 that morning with black coffee cooling beside a stack of routine files. The air outside was wet and heavy from a dawn thunderstorm, the kind of summer morning that makes the courthouse windows sweat. Most of my docket looked ordinary: speeding, disorderly conduct, a bond review, an arraignment that should have taken 6 minutes. Then the Reed matter came up, and I felt that old tug in my chest that tells me a paper file is lying about how small a case really is. I have been a municipal judge for 28 years, and before I ever opened a law book, my father was teaching me at our kitchen table that rules without heart become weapons. He practiced law in a town where people still shook hands after funerals and still lied under oath when fear got hold of them. I carry him with me every time I take the bench. I take every case seriously, even the ones that arrive dressed up as nothing. This one came dressed in a luxury suit, a damaged cooler, and a young man who had never once been told that no meant no. The defendant was Trevor Halston Reed, age 24, the only son of developer Victor Reed, whose name sat on hospitals, art centers, and one overfunded athletic field on the north side of town. Trevor walked in wearing a soft cream jacket, a white t-shirt so plain it had to be expensive, a Hermes belt with that bright metal buckle, and a Rolex that flashed every time he touched his face. He carried himself like the room had already been bought and paid for. His black Porsche 911 Turbo S with custom TR1 plates had been left half-crooked by the curb. Even from the bench, I could see the confidence on him like cologne. Elena was not dramatic. She did not cry for effect. She sat upright, chin level, shoulders tired but steady. In all my years, I have learned that quiet people often bring the heaviest truth. The file said she was the victim of a traffic collision and possible witness intimidation on July 3, 2025 at 10:47 p.m. at the corner of Grant Avenue and Willow Street, 1 block west of St. Catherine's loading dock. Trevor's lawyers wanted it treated like a minor driving matter. The original police report listed reckless operation, leaving marked lanes and obstruction, but the deeper I read, the less it looked like a traffic case and the more it looked like a choice. At 10:47 that night, Elena was driving a blue 2014 Toyota Corolla east on Grant after leaving the hospital pharmacy annex. A traffic camera later fixed Trevor's speed at 61 miles per hour in a posted 35. His Porsche cut around a delivery van, clipped Elena's rear driver's side quarter panel, and shoved her car into the curb hard enough to bend the front axle and crush the cooler she had strapped into the passenger seat. The impact spun her almost half around. The camera caught sparks, shattered plastic, and Elena's brake lights jerking red across wet pavement like a wound opening. Officer Daniel Pike, badge 417, reached the scene at 10:52 p.m. His body camera showed Elena standing beside her car, one hand on the door, the other over a cracked blue medical transport cooler. Trevor stood in a fire lane 112 feet away near his Porsche, shoes clean, jacket untouched, phone in hand. Officer Pike's report said Trevor claimed Elena came out of nowhere and made a drama out of a fender bender. But Marlon Reese, a Route 14 bus driver, stopped at the light, told officers Elena had the green, and Trevor had flown through like the street belonged to him. Those were his exact words. I remembered them. What mattered to Elena was not the car. It was the cooler. Inside it were 3 temperature-controlled vials of pediatric rescue medication and a signed chain of custody form from the St. Catherine Pharmacy. The medication had to stay between 36 and 46 degrees. After the crash, the digital strip inside the lid read 51 degrees and kept climbing. By 11:09 p.m., the vials were no longer safe to use. The loss was valued at $8,460.72. Elena also carried a sealed manila packet she was supposed to deliver to hospital compliance first thing the next morning. That packet would come to matter far more than anyone expected. Elena's backstory mattered too, though she did not offer it for pity. She worked nights because the shift differential paid enough to keep Mateo in braces and help with Rosa's medicine copays. She had missed exactly 4 days of work in 5 years, 1 for pneumonia and 3 when her mother had a catheter infection. Her Corolla had 198,000 miles on it. She kept jumper cables in the trunk and a roll of crackers in the glove box for long nights. The prosecution file noted she had refused Trevor's cash offer at the scene and said, "This is not mine to settle. Hospital property is involved." I underlined that sentence twice. Marlon Reese, age 53, sat on the witness bench later and told me he heard Trevor say, "Take 10 grand and stop acting like this matters." Marlon had been driving city buses for 22 years and had the kind of voice that never changes shape to please anybody. He said Elena answered, "Sir, it matters. Please stop talking and wait for the officer." Marlon also saw Trevor lean into Elena's car through the broken passenger door for 2 or 3 seconds before stepping back. At the time, no one knew whether he had reached for the cooler, the packet, or nothing at all. That little movement hung over the whole morning like a dark bird. When Clerk Sandra Bell called the case and Bailiff Marcus Hill told everyone to rise, Trevor gave the bare minimum. He stood slowly. He sighed when I began. He entered an initial plea of not guilty through counsel, then muttered something that made Marcus take 1 step closer. I asked the prosecutor to proceed. She told me the city would show probable cause not only for reckless operation, but for deliberate interference with medical property and for witness intimidation tied to a pending hospital report. At that, Trevor finally looked straight up at me. It was the first real sign that he understood this was not going to be handled with a checkbook. Trevor began Act 2 with his mouth, and that was his first mistake. Before the prosecutor could call Officer Pike, Trevor leaned toward his lawyer and said, loud enough for half the room, "This is traffic court. Why are we pretending it's murder?" A murmur moved through the gallery. I let it settle. Then I said, "Mr. Reed, if you wish to be heard, your lawyer will make that request. If you wish to perform, there are other rooms in this city." He smiled the thin smile of a man who thinks a warning is theater. "No disrespect, Judge," he said, though every syllable carried disrespect. "I just didn't know we were doing cable TV justice today." The prosecutor then introduced Pike's body camera footage. In it, Elena's voice trembled only once when she said, "Officer, those meds can't get warm." Trevor's voice never trembled at all. "I already offered her money," he said. "This is what insurance is for." Officer Pike also testified that when he asked Trevor why he had moved his Porsche from the lane of travel to the fire zone before police arrived, Trevor answered, "Because I'm not leaving a 9-to-5 toy in the middle of the street for amateurs to hit." Even his lawyer winced at that. The city also entered the tow invoice, the crash photos, and the repair estimate for Elena's Corolla, $6,912.48. The city's next exhibit was the pharmacy transport log from St. Catherine. It was plain paper, 3 signatures, 1 seal, and a printed temperature strip report. But I have seen entire cases turn on plainer documents than that. The chain of custody form showed Elena signed out the cooler at 10:31 p.m., received it sealed at 37.4 degrees, and acknowledged delivery due no later than 11:15 p.m. A red note at the bottom added after the crash said, "Temperature excursion at 10:58 p.m., product unusable." There is a force to quiet paperwork when it has been kept correctly. Miles Benton objected on foundation. The prosecutor laid it cleanly. I admitted it. Marlon Reese came next, and he was the kind of witness every judge hopes for and every dishonest party fears. He did not dress his answers up. He said he was stopped at the westbound light in a city bus with 6 passengers. He saw Elena move on green. He saw Trevor's Porsche come around a white delivery van too fast for common sense. He heard the crash through his closed windshield. Then he saw Trevor get out, walk to Elena's passenger side, and lean in. "Did he look concerned?" the prosecutor asked. Marlon shook his head. "No, ma'am. He looked annoyed, like the road had argued with him." Even Trevor stopped smiling at that. About halfway through the morning, I looked over the file and realized the city had not yet used its sharpest blade. So let me ask you to stay with me here. If you think money can outtalk facts forever, test that belief against what came next, because this is where the case stopped being about a wet street and started being about intent. The prosecutor introduced a forensic extraction from Trevor's phone, completed under warrant after he refused consent. Miles Benton objected. argued privacy, argued scope, argued almost everything a lawyer can argue when he knows the answer is inside the device. The warrant held. I admitted the limited portions tied to the crash window. At 10:49 p.m., 2 minutes after impact, Trevor sent a text to a contact saved as NR. It read, "She still has the packet from C-Wing." At 10:50 p.m., before Officer Pike reached the scene, he sent another message, "Need this cleaned up now." There was no mention of insurance, no question about injuries, no worry about the medications, only the packet. The room did not gasp. Real courtrooms rarely do, but people sat straighter. Elena kept her eyes on the wood grain of the witness stand. Trevor looked at his lawyer for the first time that morning with something close to concern. The prosecutor then moved to admit part of Trevor's own social media live stream from earlier that evening. Not the flashy parts, not the nightclub noise. Just a timestamp at 10:34 p.m. showing him inside the lower parking deck of St. Catherine's Donor Garage, revving the Porsche for the camera and laughing, "Midnight run before Dad's fundraiser call." Miles Benton objected again. He said location was prejudicial. I said location was relevant. The prosecutor paired that clip with garage exit data showing Trevor's car left the hospital campus at 10:39 p.m. Elena's employee gate pass showed she left at 10:43 p.m. Grant and Willow was 1.8 miles from the garage. My father used to say timing is the poor man's truth serum. Then came the question that cracked the case open. The prosecutor asked Elena why she had a compliance packet in her car at all. Elena took one breath and said, "Because the original report I filed on June 29th disappeared from the hospital system on July 2nd. There it was. Not just a crash, not just a damaged cooler, a missing report." The prosecutor asked what the June 29th report described. Elena looked at Trevor once, then back at the prosecutor. "I reported seeing Mr. Reed use a donor access badge to enter a restricted pediatric medication corridor at 2:23 a.m. Miles Benton was on his feet before she finished. So was half the air in the room. "I overruled the objection only after I heard the basis. The prosecutor was no longer walking me toward a guess. She was walking me toward a structure. Elena testified that on June 29th, she saw Trevor outside the C-Wing pediatric pain cabinet area carrying 2 sealed tamper pouches he had no authority to possess. She recognized him because his father's foundation had hosted charity events at the hospital. She reported it through internal channels. On July 2nd, the report was gone from the system. On July 3rd, she printed her backup notes, placed them in the packet, and planned to hand them directly to hospital compliance. When court took a breath, I knew something even bigger was already knocking at the door. The real truth began with a child none of us had seen that morning. His name was Liam Harper. He was 8 years old, and he was one of the St. Catherine patients connected to the medication corridor Elena had reported. The cooler she carried on July 3rd held replacement rescue doses for a home transfer unit covering Liam's overnight pain plan after a severe treatment reaction. Because the cooler was compromised in the crash, those doses were discarded. A substitute shipment did not reach the home unit until 5:41 a.m. Liam lived, but that night, according to the later records, he suffered hours of pain that should never have happened. Harm does not have to kill someone to be cruel. That was what made it land so hard. She said, "I kept thinking about that little boy while I was standing on Grant Avenue with glass in my shoes." Then she corrected herself and added, "Not just him, the others too." The prosecutor asked what she meant by others. Elena explained that the missing June 29th report named 3 pediatric patients whose medication counts no longer matched inventory after Trevor's unauthorized entry. The crash, she told us, made her fear it was about more. Trevor chose that moment to speak, and it was the worst choice he made all day. He stood before his lawyer could pull him back and said, "This is insane. You all act like I robbed a church. My father pays for half this city. Look around, Judge. You work for my father." The words came out hot and fast, like he had finally said the truest thing in his own head. Marcus Hill took one step forward. Sandra Bell stopped typing for a full second. I felt the whole room waiting to see whether I would rise to his insult or stay in the work. I stayed in the work. "Mr. Reed," I said, and my voice was quiet enough that he had to listen. "The only thing I work for in this courtroom is the law, and the law does not bend because your family's name is carved into stone someplace else." He opened his mouth again. I lifted one hand. Another outburst, and I will hold you in contempt before lunch. That shut him for the moment. But if you think that was the line that broke him, wait one more beat with me, because what came through the side door less than a minute later answered him better than I ever could have. The side door opened at 11:14 a.m. and Dr. Naomi Price entered with the prosecutor carrying a sealed evidence envelope and a stack of certified records. Dr. Price was 52, Chief Compliance Officer at St. Catherine, and she wore authority the way some people wear perfume, lightly but everywhere. She had been delayed by a records hold and by a call, she said under oath, from Victor Reed himself at 10:32 that morning. For the first time, the confidence fell off him completely. Dr. Price took the witness stand, adjusted her glasses, and asked if she might speak plainly. I said yes. She confirmed Elena had filed the June 29th report at 3:07 a.m. and that the report had been quarantined, not deleted, after an unauthorized administrative access request from an outside Reed Holdings device. She confirmed Trevor's donor badge swipes at 2:21 a.m. and 2:26 a.m. in a restricted pediatric corridor. She confirmed 2 sealed tamper pouches were later discovered missing, one tied to Liam Harper's overnight pain protocol. Then she opened the envelope and identified certified still photographs from the corridor camera showing Trevor carrying those pouches under his jacket. These were released this morning, she said, after Victor Reed signed an affidavit instructing full cooperation and stating his son had no authority to act for him, the hospital, or the foundation. There are many kinds of silence in a courtroom. There is bored silence, angry silence, grief silence. This was the rare kind that comes when a lie loses all air at once. Dr. Price went on. She said Reed Holdings also turned over garage surveillance showing Trevor waiting in his Porsche near the employee exit from 10:36 p.m. until Elena pulled out at 10:43 p.m. He followed her for 1.8 miles before impact. That made the crash look less like speed and more like pursuit. The prosecutor then moved to amend the bond conditions and add witness intimidation and tampering based on the new probable cause packet. Benton did not even rise right away. He just stared at his client. Then Dr. Price said the one thing that made my skin go cold. She said Liam Harper's grandmother had asked her to deliver a short victim impact statement if the court allowed it, not for sympathy, but so the people responsible would understand the actual shape of the harm. I allowed the statement into the record. Sandra read it aloud because the grandmother was at the hospital. It said Liam spent that night curled around a heating pad, asking every 20 minutes why the medicine was late and whether he had done something wrong. I have heard murder facts. I have heard beatings. Sometimes a child asking what he did wrong lands just as hard. Trevor did not argue after that. He did not speak. He did not look at Elena. He sat there with his hands clasped so tightly over that flashing Rolex, I thought he might bruise himself. His lawyer requested a brief recess. I granted 10 minutes. When we came back, the city moved for bond modification. I raised it from a signature bond to $250,000 cash or surety and ordered surrender of passport, vehicle keys, and all donor or institutional access credentials pending trial. Trevor looked toward the back of the room as if someone might rescue him. No one did. Money had finally reached one of its limits. Act 3 ended not with a shout, but with a photograph. Dr. Price handed up one final still from the pediatric corridor. In it, Trevor was half turned toward the camera, the red tamper pouch visible under his jacket, his father's donor badge hanging from his neck like borrowed honor. I looked at the photo, then at the young man in front of me, and then at Elena, who sat with her hands folded as if she had not just carried the whole truth into that room on exhausted shoulders. No one moved, no one whispered, even the air vents seemed to stop. That was the moment the courtroom went completely silent. 3 weeks later, on August 8, 2025, Trevor Reed stood before me again for sentencing after entering a guilty plea to reckless operation, obstruction, witness intimidation, and tampering with medical property under an agreement that also required full factual admission on the record. The county prosecutor was still pursuing related felony diversion charges, but what sat before me that day was enough for judgment. Trevor looked different. Same expensive haircut, same polished shoes, but no cream jacket, no swagger. His Porsche had been sold by the family, I later learned, to cover part of the restitution and legal costs. That detail did not impress me. Cars are easy to lose. Character is harder. Before I sentenced him, I heard from Elena again. She gave her victim impact statement in the same steady voice she had used all along. She did not ask me to destroy him. She did not ask for revenge. She asked for sleep. She asked for the cost of her car, her phone, her lost wages, and the hospital losses to be repaid. She asked that he never be allowed inside a pediatric medical area again without lawful clearance. Then she said one sentence I wrote down by hand. I need him to understand that other people's hard nights are not his playground. I have heard lawyers speak for hours and say less than that. Trevor also had the right to speak. He rose and apologized in the thin way people do when they are sorry for consequences before they are sorry for harm. He said he had been under pressure. He said he had been using pills. He said he never meant for any child to suffer. I believed part of that and not the rest. Intent is a layered thing. A man may not plan every wound he causes, but if he chooses arrogance over caution and silence over truth, he is still carrying that harm in his own hands. I told him that from the bench. I told him wealth had hidden him from many things, but it had not hidden him from his own choices. Then I picked up the sentencing sheet and looked directly at him. Mr. Reed, I said, my father taught me that rules without heart become weapons, but heart without rules becomes permission for the powerful to do as they please. This court will offer you neither cruelty nor permission. You could feel the room leaning in. Sandra Bell had stopped moving except for her fingers. Marcus Hill stood by the rail like stone. The gallery, which had been fuller than usual that day, went still in the way only a public room can when people sense a line is about to be drawn where it should have been drawn long ago. I sentenced him to 180 days in the county jail with 60 days to serve immediately and the remaining 120 suspended on strict conditions. I imposed 3 years of license suspension. I ordered inpatient substance evaluation, followed by monitored treatment, random screening, and a permanent no-contact order protecting Elena Morales and the Harper family. I ordered restitution in the exact amount of $16,855, $60, payable first to Elena for her direct losses and then to St. Catherine for the compromised medication. I also made clear that any failure to pay, appear, or comply would trigger execution of the suspended time. Wealth often assumes it can buy flexibility. I wrote none into the order. But I was not finished because punishment should teach the truth of the harm when it can. So let me say something to you here. If you still believe ordinary people deserve a courthouse that remembers them, then you and I belong to the same stubborn community, and this next part is why. As a condition of probation, I ordered 600 hours of supervised community service with the Northfield Night Medical Transport Program, the city service that carries low-income patients, elderly dialysis patients, and overnight hospital workers between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. He would not drive. He would load wheelchairs, clean vans, carry bags, and wait in the dark with people whose schedules he had once treated like trash. I chose that because it fit. Elena's nights had been made harder by his entitlement. Liam Harper's pain had been lengthened by his interference. The road had been his toy. Now the night road would become his classroom. I added one more condition by agreement of counsel, and with his signed consent, he was barred from profiting from or posting about any part of that service on social media. No redemption content, no smiling videos beside a transport van. Service is not a costume. It counts only when no applause follows it home. Trevor swallowed hard when I read that condition. I think that landed almost as hard as the jail time. His physical reaction was small, but I noticed it. The shoulders dropped first, then the jaw. Then both hands went flat on the defense table as if he needed to feel something solid under him. Miles Benton leaned in and spoke softly, probably explaining reporting instructions and appeal rights. Trevor did not answer right away. In the second row, Elena closed her eyes once, only once, and then opened them again. She did not smile. People who have carried too much for too long rarely celebrate in public. Sandra gathered the file with neat, practiced hands. Marcus moved to Trevor's side when I remanded him for immediate processing on the jail portion. A low murmur rolled through the gallery then, not loud enough for me to correct, just human enough to remind me why open court matters. One woman put a hand over her mouth. An older man nodded to himself. Trevor turned as Marcus guided him away, and for a brief second I saw not a billionaire's son, Not a headline waiting to be written, but a frightened 24-year-old who had finally met the edge of the world. Elena remained seated until the side door closed behind him. Only then did she stand. She gathered her envelope, now thinner because most of its papers were exhibits, and thanked the clerk before she ever looked at me. When the room had mostly emptied, I stepped down from the bench for a moment I usually would have skipped if the docket had been crowded. Elena was near the rail, and Marcus had given us a respectful pocket of space. I said, "Ms. Morales, the court does not often say this plainly enough, but thank you for holding your ground." She looked tired clear through to the bone, yet her eyes stayed steady. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "My son told me to go back." I smiled at that. "Listen to him more often," I said. She gave the smallest laugh of the whole case, nodded once, and left with her cardigan folded over one arm. After all these years, people still ask me whether cases like that make me cynical. The answer is no. Tired, yes, sad, often, but not cynical. Because what I saw on Bell Street that July was not just arrogance. I saw a nurse with cracked hands and a long shift behind her tell the truth when the truth had become expensive. I saw a clerk keep the record clean. I saw a bailiff guard the room without adding himself to the drama. I saw a witness say what he saw and not one word more. A courtroom is never just a judge. It is a chain of ordinary people deciding not to look away. My father used to tell me that power reveals itself most clearly in the small moments, in whether you wait your turn, in whether you tell the truth when a lie would be easier, in whether you remember that the tired woman in scrubs, the old man on dialysis, the child in pain, and the stranger with less money than you are not background characters in your life. They are people with full names, full burdens, and the same claim to dignity that you have. That lesson sat in my chest the whole day. It sits there still. And I will leave you with this. Thank you for sitting with me through one of the heaviest stories of that summer. If you come back and keep me company again, I will tell you about the morning a man in work boots stood in my courtroom and said one sentence that made a room full of lawyers forget how to breathe. Until then, remember this for me and for yourself. The law cannot make us good, but it can still stand up in a hard, bright hour and tell the powerful that other people's lives are not theirs to use.